You've always been a disappointment." The words sliced through the air of my parents' immaculate living room, each syllable sharper than the crystal decorations catching afternoon light on the mahogany shelves. My father's face remained expressionless, the same stoic mask he'd worn to business meetings and my childhood piano recitals alike. Beside him, my mother dabbed at non-existent tears with a monogrammed handkerchief, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light with each theatrical movement. "My name is Olivia Chun, 32, born and raised in Boston's affluent Beacon Hill neighborhood. Until yesterday, I thought I understood what family meant. I was wrong. Dad, please. Can we talk about this rationally?" My voice sounded foreign to my own ear, small, pleading, childlike. I hated it immediately. "I've spent the last 10 years building this nonprofit from nothing. The work we're doing in underserved communities is making a real difference. A real difference." My mother's laugh was practiced, musical, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Darling, you've thrown away a Harvard Law degree to play social worker in neighborhoods where people don't even want your help. And now you expect us to fund this pet project." The living room suddenly felt airless, its perfect cream walls closing in. This space had never felt like home. Even when I lived here more, like an upscale hotel, where touching the wrong object might incur a fee. The Persian rug beneath my feet had cost more than my annual salary. The painting above the fireplace was an original Monet my father had purchased as an investment. Everything in this room, including the people, had been carefully curated to project an image of success. "It's not about the money," I said, though we all knew that wasn't entirely true. My organization, Second Chance Education Initiative, desperately needed funding to continue our literacy programs in underserved communities. After exhausting every grant opportunity and donation avenue, I'd finally swallowed my pride and come to my parents. "It's about believing in something bigger than ourselves." My father checked his watch, a Swiss timepiece worth more than my car. "Your grandfather believed in something bigger, to family legacy. Tradition. Maintaining what generations before us built." He straightened his already perfect tie. "Which is why we've removed you from our will." The words hit like a physical blow, not because I'd been counting on the money. I'd built my life specifically to avoid dependency on my parents' fortune, but because of what it symbolized. The final severance. The ultimate declaration that my choices had placed me irrevocably outside the family circle. "You, ... what?" I managed to ask, my hands gripping the armrests of the antique chair I'd never been allowed to sit in as a child. "It's been decided," my mother said, her voice taking on the same tone she used when firing household staff. "The family assets will go to your cousin Philip and his children. They understand the importance of carrying on the Chun name properly." Philip, my investment banker cousin with his picture-perfect family, whose greatest act of rebellion had been choosing Yale over Harvard, who called my father Uncle Richard with just the right amount of deference at family gatherings, who had never questioned a single family expectation. "This isn't about the money," I repeated, more to myself than to them. "But I don't understand." When Grandpa was alive, he always supported my choices. He believed in what I'm doing. At the mention of my grandfather, a strange expression flickered across my father's face so quickly, I almost missed it. Something like guilt, uncertainty. Before I could analyze it, his features had reset to impassive disapproval. "Your grandfather was a sentimental old man whose judgment became questionable in his final years," my father said dismissively. "Had he lived to see what you've done with your potential, he would have been as disappointed as we are." The lie in that statement was so blatant it nearly made me laugh. My grandfather, Chun Weiming, had been the only person in my family who truly saw me. While my parents pushed me toward law firms and corporate success, Grandpa had listened to my dreams of making education accessible to everyone. His own journey from penniless immigrant to successful business owner had taught him the value of opportunity. "Education is the door that no one can close once opened," he used to tell me. "That's not true," I said, finding strength in the memory of my grandfather's kind eyes. "Grandpa believed in me, in what I'm trying to do. Well, he's gone now," my mother said with finality, "and his estate has already been distributed according to his wishes." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I thought most of Grandpa's assets were tied up in the family business." My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "That's none of your concern anymore," my father said, standing to signal the end of our conversation. "You made your choice 10 years ago when you rejected the path we laid out for you. Now you can live with the consequences." The dismissal was absolute. As I gathered my things, the proposal for my organization's expansion left untouched on the coffee table. A crushing weight of finality settled over me. Whatever connection had remained between us, whatever fragile hope I'd harbored that they might eventually understand my choices, had been severed. At the door, my mother caught my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed something like regret in her perfectly made-up face. "Olivia," she said quietly, glancing over her shoulder to ensure my father couldn't hear, "there's a box of your grandfather's things in the guest room closet, things he wanted you to have. Take it when you go." Before I could respond, she'd already turned away, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors as she rejoined my father in the living room. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process this unexpected gesture before heading upstairs to the guest room. The box was where she'd said it would be, a simple cardboard container labeled "For Olivia" in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. It wasn't sealed or hidden, which made me wonder how long it had been sitting there, waiting for me to claim it. I carried it out to my car without saying goodbye to my parents. Whatever tentative olive branch my mother had extended by telling me about the box, it wasn't enough to erase the words that had been spoken in that living room. As I drove away from the house I'd grown up in, the spring rain that had been threatening all afternoon finally began to fall, matching the tears that streamed down my face. Back at my small apartment across town, I placed the box on my kitchen table but couldn't bring myself to open it immediately. Instead, I moved through the familiar comfort of my evening routine, changing into worn sweatpants, brewing chamomile tea, checking emails from my staff about tomorrow's literacy workshop. The normalcy helped ground me after the emotional earthquake of the afternoon. Finally, tea in hand, I sat down and opened the box that contained my grandfather's last gifts to me. Inside were items I recognized immediately: the jade pendant he always wore for good luck, a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that we'd read together when I was 12, photos of us throughout the years. But beneath these treasures was something unexpected: a sealed envelope with "Read this alone" written on the front. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, several pages long, and what appeared to be a key taped to the last page. "My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, I have left this world, and you have finally received this box. I instructed your parents to give it to you immediately after my passing, but knowing my son, he may have delayed. For that, I apologize. First, let me say what I may not have said enough while living. I am proud of you, prouder than I have been of anyone in my life. When you turned down the corporate law position to start your education initiative, you showed more courage than I did at twice your age. You chose purpose over comfort, impact over wealth. In doing so, you honored the true Chun family legacy far more than those who merely preserved its fortune. Which brings me to why I'm writing this letter." I paused, taking a sip of tea to steady myself. Already, my grandfather's words were healing something that had broken inside me during that awful conversation with my parents. I continued reading. "There are things about our family that you don't know, things your father has carefully kept hidden. When I came to America in 1962, I had nothing but $20 and a single change of clothes. The story you've been told about how I built our family business from scratch through hard work alone is only partly true. What nobody knows is that I had help from a man named James Sullivan, a teacher who found me sleeping in a park and took me in. James taught me English, helped me navigate American customs, and eventually loaned me the money to start my first business. He did all this asking nothing in return except that someday I would help others as he had helped me. The Chun fortune was built on this promise. Your father has forgotten that. He sees only what was built, not why or how. But you, my Olivia, you understand the promise I made, even though you never knew about it. Your work fulfills my debt to James in ways that money never could. Which is why I couldn't leave this world without ensuring you could continue that work." My heart began to race as I turned to the next page. "What I'm about to tell you must remain between us for now. While the majority of my visible assets were indeed incorporated into the family business your father now controls, they represent only a portion of my estate. 30 years ago, I established a separate foundation under a different name. The Liu Educational Trust, named for my mother's family, has operated quietly, funding scholarships for immigrant students. The foundation owns several properties and investments that your father knows nothing about. As of my passing, control of this foundation transfers to you. I nearly dropped the letter in shock. This couldn't be real. And yet, as I read on, my grandfather detailed exactly how to access the foundation's accounts, where to find the documentation, and who to contact to facilitate the transfer of authority. The key taped to the last page belonged to a safe deposit box at Boston National Bank, containing all the necessary legal documents. The foundation's assets amount to approximately $28 million. Use it wisely, my child. Not for revenge against your parents, they are limited by their fears in ways you will never be, but to expand the important work you've already begun. There is one condition: the existence of this foundation must remain confidential for 1 year following my death. Legal reasons I won't bore you with, but also to give you time to prepare for the inevitable family fallout when the truth emerges. Remember always, true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in lives changed. By that measure, you are already the richest member of our family, with eternal love and pride. Grandpa. P.S. There's one more thing in the box, beneath the false bottom. A reminder of who you come from and why your work matters so much. Stunned, I set down the letter and examined the box again. Sure enough, the cardboard bottom lifted to reveal a hidden compartment containing a single photograph I'd never seen before. It showed my grandfather as a young man, standing beside another man in front of a small classroom. They had their arms around each other's shoulders, both beaming with pride. Written on the back in faded ink, Wayman and James, opening day of the Literacy Center, 1975. A literacy center? My grandfather had helped start a literacy center, just like the ones my organization now ran throughout Boston. Tears spilled down my cheeks. But they weren't tears of sadness or anger. For the first time since hearing my parents' cruel words, I felt something like peace. My grandfather had seen me, truly seen me, and in his final act, had given me not just the means to continue my work, but validation that I had been following in his footsteps all along. Outside my apartment window, the rain had stopped. The wet streets reflected the city lights, like pathways of possibility stretching into the distance. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank. Tomorrow, I would begin to understand the magnitude of what my grandfather had entrusted to me. But tonight, I held the photograph of 2 young men who had changed lives through education, and I allowed myself to feel, at last, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Not cut off, as my parents had intended, but connected to something far more meaningful than a traditional inheritance. My grandfather's letter had indeed changed everything, not by making me wealthy, but by showing me that I had been rich all along in the ways that truly mattered. The lobby of Boston National Bank echoed with the purposeful clicks of expensive shoes against marble floors. Men and women in tailored suits moved with the confident efficiency of people who belonged in places where money was stored in quantities most could only imagine. I felt conspicuously out of place in my modest blazer and sensible flats, clutching the key my grandfather had left me like it might dissolve if I loosened my grip. Miss Chun. The bank manager, a woman named Gloria Patterson, approached with a professional smile. I understand you're here about a safe deposit box. If you'll follow me, please. I'd called ahead, as my grandfather's letter instructed, mentioning the specific reference number that would alert the bank to the importance of my visit. The response had been a immediate appointment with the manager herself rather than a regular clerk. We rode the elevator in silence to the basement level where the safe deposit boxers were kept. The temperature seemed to drop with each floor we descended, or perhaps it was just my nerves. What if this was all some elaborate mistake? What if my grandfather's mind had truly been failing in his final days, as my father had suggested? Your grandfather was a remarkable man, Gloria said suddenly as we walked down a sterile hallway. I had the privilege of working with him for nearly 15 years. I glanced at her in surprise. You knew him well as anyone in the financial world, I suppose. He was unconventional in his approaches. Brilliant, but never one to follow the expected path. She paused before a heavy door, swiping her security card. Much like you, from what he told me, the revelation that my grandfather had spoken about me too, this woman sent a warm current through my chest. What else had he shared? How much did Gloria Patterson know about the mysterious foundation outlined in his letter? The safe deposit vault was temperature-controlled and smelled faintly of metal and paper. Gloria led me to a private viewing room before retrieving the box that matched my key. "Take all the time you need," she said, placing the long, rectangular metal container on the table. "When you're ready to discuss the contents, I'll be in my office upstairs. Mr. Chun left specific instructions about assisting you after you've reviewed everything." Alone with the box, I took a deep breath before inserting the key. The lock turned smoothly, suggesting it had been recently maintained. Inside, I found several neatly organized folders, each labeled in my grandfather's meticulous handwriting: foundation documents, property deeds, investment portfolios, and finally, for Olivia, open first. Following his instruction, I opened the last folder. Inside was another letter, shorter than the one from the box at my parents' house, along with what appeared to be a flash drive. "Olivia, if you're reading this, you've taken the first step into your new role. In this box, you'll find all the legal documentation establishing you as the sole trustee of the Liu Educational Trust. Everything has been prepared by my attorneys and requires only your signature to activate the transfer of authority. The flash drive contains a video I recorded for you, explaining in more detail why I established this foundation and chose you to lead it. There are things I wanted to tell you face to face, even if only through a screen. Gloria Patterson has been the financial advisor for the trust since its inception. She can be trusted completely and will help guide you through the transition. The first year may be challenging as you balance your current work with learning to manage these new resources. Be patient with yourself. With love and confidence, Grandpa." Setting aside the letter, I reached for the folder labeled Foundation Documents. What I found inside left me breathless. The Liu Educational Trust wasn't just some small side project my grandfather had maintained. It was a sophisticated philanthropic organization with an endowment, a board structure with several vacant seats now awaiting my appointments, and a mission statement that could have been written by my own hand to provide educational opportunities that transform lives and communities, with special focus on immigrant populations and underserved neighborhoods. The property deeds revealed ownership of 6 buildings across Boston, currently leased to community organizations at nominal rents. The investment portfolios showed a diverse, socially responsible approach that had yielded stable returns for decades. It was overwhelming. I, who had been scraping together grants and donations to fund a staff of 5, now held the keys to resources that could expand our impact beyond anything I'd imagined. When I finally emerged from the viewing room, nearly 3 hours had passed. Gloria was waiting patiently, as promised. "Ready to talk?" she asked, noting my dazed expression with understanding. I think so," I managed, still clutching the folders, "though I'm not sure I fully comprehend everything yet." "Few would, in your position," she assured me as we walked to her office. "That's why your grandfather arranged for a transition team to support you." Her office offered a stunning view of Boston Harbor, but I barely noticed the scenery as she outlined what would happen next. Meetings with the Foundation's legal team, introductions to the current board members, tutorials on the financial systems. "Your grandfather was adamant that you should have complete control over the Foundation's direction," Gloria explained. "But he also wanted to ensure you had all the support necessary to succeed." "Why didn't he tell me about any of this while he was alive?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since I'd first read his letter. Gloria's expression soft. "He wanted to, many times. But there were complications with your father." She chose her words carefully. "Richard Chun has certain expectations about family wealth and how it should be managed. Your grandfather feared that premature knowledge of the trust might create difficulties between you and your parents before you were fully established in your own career." "Too late for that," I said with a hollow laugh, explaining briefly about yesterday's confrontation. Gloria nodded, unsurprised. Wei-Ming anticipated something like this might happen. It's partly why he arranged for the 1-year confidentiality period. He wanted you to have time to grow into your role before facing any potential ... interference. The delicate way she avoided directly criticizing my father told me volumes about her professionalism and loyalty to my grandfather. It also reinforced the reality I was now facing. This inheritance would eventually become known to my family, and when it did, the fallout would be significant. What happens when the year is up? I asked. The foundation's full details become part of the public record, as required by law. Your position as trustee will be officially announced. She hesitated. Your grandfather believed that by then, you would be prepared for whatever response this might provoke. I wasn't so sure, but I nodded anyway. 1 year seemed both impossibly distant and alarmingly close. As our meeting concluded, Gloria handed me a business card with her personal cell phone number handwritten on the back. Call anytime, day or night, if you have questions. Wei Ming was more than a client to me. Helping you honor his legacy is important to me. Back in my apartment that evening, I connected the flash drive to my laptop. My grandfather's face appeared on the screen, recorded perhaps 6 months before his death. He looked thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were clear and bright. Olivia, he began, smiling into the camera. I wish we could be having this conversation in person, sitting in my garden with tea as we used to do. Since that's not possible, this will have to suffice. He shifted slightly, adjusting his position in what I recognize as his favorite armchair. I want to tell you a story, the true story of our family and the fortune your father now guards so jealously. For the next hour, my grandfather spoke about his early days in America, filling in details that had been sanitized from the family narrative. He described sleeping in parks, washing dishes for meals, the constant fear of deportation. Then meeting James Sullivan, the high school English teacher, who changed everything. James didn't just give me a place to stay, my grandfather explained, his voice thick with emotion, even decades later. He showed me how to navigate this new world, taught me not just English but how American systems worked, who held power and how to speak to them. Most importantly, he treated me with dignity when many others saw only an unwelcome foreigner. The story took an unexpected turn as my grandfather revealed how he and James had later become business partners, opening first a small grocery store, then expanding to an import business, and eventually the technology components manufacturing that became the foundation of Chun Industries. Your father believes I built this business through sheer determination and business acumen, my grandfather said with a sad smile. And those played their part. But he never understood that the true catalyst was human kindness, one person seeing another's potential and investing in it. That's the actual family legacy. Olivia, not the money, but the obligation to extend to others the same opportunity that was given to me. He explained how James had died unexpectedly in 1979, leaving his share of the business to my grandfather with a single request: do for others what I did for you. I established the Liu Educational Trust to fulfill that promise, my grandfather continued. Your father never knew James E. was just a child when we started the business, and only 10 when James died. By the time Richard was old enough to take an interest in the company history, he was already fixated on growth, expansion, profit margins. When I tried to explain the importance of our educational initiatives, he saw them as tax write-offs at best, distractions at worst. The pain in my grandfather's eyes as he spoke about my father was unmistakable. Not anger, but deep disappointment. I made mistakes, Olivia. I should have insisted harder, taught him better. Perhaps if your grandmother had lived longer, he shook his head, but regrets solve nothing. What matters is that in you, I see the values that built our family's success, not just intelligence or ambition, but compassion and perspective. He leaned closer to the camera, his gaze intensifying. The foundation is now yours, but remember its purpose isn't to make you wealthy. It's to empower you to help others as James helped me, as you've already been doing with your own organization. Integrate your work with the foundation's resources. Expand your vision. Prove to yourself, not to your parents or anyone else, that my faith in you is justified. The video continued with more practical advice about managing the foundation, potential challenges I might face, and his hopes for its future. But it was his final words that lodged in my heart. Your name, Olivia, means peace. I gave it to you hoping you would find harmony in a family often divided by ambition. Instead, you've found your own path to peace through purpose. That's better than anything I could have wished for you. Lead with that purpose. and you cannot go wrong. The screen went dark, but I sat motionless, tears streaming down my face. Through this video, my grandfather had given me something my parents never had: context for who I was and why I'd always felt like an outsider in my own family. My instinct to help others wasn't a rejection of the Chun legacy as my parents believed. It was its purest expression. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months, perhaps years. The uncertainty about my organization's future had been lifted, replaced by a different kind of challenge: how to honor my grandfather's trust while navigating the complex emotions his secret had stirred. The next morning, I arrived at our modest office in Dorchester earlier than usual. The converted Victorian house served as headquarters for Second Chance Education Initiative, with classrooms on the first floor and administrative offices above. My small team, 3 full-time teachers, a program coordinator, and our part-time grant writer were the most dedicated people I knew, continuing to work despite irregular paychecks and zero job security. Maya, our program coordinator, looked up in surprise as I entered. "You're early," and smiling. "What happened to the funding crisis that had you stress eating all those donuts yesterday?" I hesitated, mindful of my grandfather's instructions about confidentiality. "Let's just say I may have found a solution. Can you gather everyone for a meeting at lunch? I have some ideas I want to discuss." The morning passed in a blur of regular activities. I taught my usual adult literacy class, helped a recent immigrant practice for his citizenship interview, and reviewed curriculum for our after-school program. But underneath it all ran a current of excitement I could barely contain. During lunch, gathered around our battered conference table with takeout containers of pad thai, I outlined a vision for expansion without revealing its source. "I know this sounds ambitious given our current budget constraints," I concluded, "but I believe we can secure the funding. In fact, I've already begun discussions with a foundation that shares our mission." My colleagues exchanged skeptical glances. They'd had similar optimism before, only to face disappointment when promised grants fell through or donors changed priorities. "Which foundation?" asked Jerome, our most experienced teacher and healthy skeptic. "We've approached pretty much every education-focused funder in Massachusetts. It's new to the area," I hedged. "I can't share details yet, but I promise this is different from our previous leads." I could see they weren't entirely convinced, but their trust in me, earned through years of shared struggle, gave me the benefit of the doubt. As they returned to their classrooms, Maya lingered behind. "Okay, what's really going on?" she asked bluntly. "Yesterday you were calculating how long we could keep the lights on, and today you're talking about new buildings and doubling staff." I considered how much to reveal to my closest colleague and friend. Maya had been with me since the beginning, working initially as a volunteer while finishing her education degree. She deserved more than vague assurances. "I received an unexpected inheritance," I said finally. "It's complicated and there are conditions attached, including confidentiality for now. But it's going to change everything for us in good ways." Maya studied my face, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I trust you. Just promise me one thing. Anything, whatever this mysterious windfall is, don't let it change what makes this place special. The personal connections, the flexibility to meet people where they are. Money has a way of bringing structure that isn't always helpful." Her concern touched me deeply because it mirrored my own thoughts. "I promise, Maya. The money will serve our mission, not the other way around." As she left, I gazed around the shabby but beloved space we'd created, walls covered with student success stories, bookshelves overflowing with donated materials, the ancient coffee maker that produced what Jerome charitably called teacher fuel. How would this place and these people change when resources were no longer our primary limitation? Over the following weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I continued running Second Chance as usual, giving no outward indication of the transformation to come. By night and weekends, I met with Gloria and the Foundation's advisors, absorbing vast amounts of information about endowment management, grant-making procedures, and nonprofit governance. The plan we developed was methodical. First, establish Second Chance as the primary operating program of the Liu Educational Trust, providing immediate funding stability. Then, over the coming months, carefully scale our programs using the foundation's resources, bringing on additional staff and securing larger facilities. 3 weeks after discovering my inheritance, I found myself standing outside a brownstone in Jamaica, playing one of the properties owned by the foundation. It was currently leased to a community arts program whose funding had recently been cut, forcing them to downsize. The building was perfect for our needs. Spacious classrooms, accessibility features, a central location near public transportation. As I toured the space with the property manager, I could envision our programs flourishing. Here: expanded adult literacy classes, dedicated spaces for after-school tutoring, maybe even the computer lab we'd always dreamed of establishing. It would be our first step toward the future my grandfather had envisioned. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table reviewing renovation estimates for the brownstone, my phone rang. The screen displayed Mom with a photo from happier times, my mother and I, at my law school graduation. Before I'd veered off their carefully plotted course, my finger hovered over the decline button. We hadn't spoken since that awful day in their living room. What could she possibly have to say now? Curiosity won out. "Hello, Olivia." My mother's voice was tight, controlled. "We need to talk. Your father and I have been discussing the situation, and we may have been hasty in our decision." I nearly dropped the phone. In 32 years, I had never heard either of my parents admit to a mistake. "What situation would that be?" I asked, working to keep my voice neutral. "The inheritance matter," she said impatiently, as if I should have known. "We've reconsidered. While we still don't approve of your career choices, cutting you off completely was perhaps extreme." The sudden reversal made no sense. "Unless, has something happened with the family business?" I asked, suspicion growing. A slight pause. "There have been some challenges. Nothing serious," she added quickly, "but your father believes having family unity during this time would be beneficial." Translation: Chun Industries was in trouble, and they were worried about appearances. Or possibly they needed access to assets they thought I might control through my grandfather. "I see," I said, allowing the silence to stretch uncomfortably. "And what exactly are you proposing?" "We'd like you to come to dinner this Saturday to discuss bringing you back into the will and other matters." I thought about the foundation, the properties, the plans already in motion that would forever change my relationship with my parents once revealed. I thought about the pain of that last confrontation, the years of disapproval that had preceded it. "I'll check my calendar and let you know," I said finally, unwilling to commit on the spot. After we hung up, I sat motionless, staring at the renovation plans without seeing them. My parents were extending an olive branch not out of love or regret, but almost certainly out of self-interest. Did that matter? Wasn't this an opportunity to begin healing the family rift? But a voice that sounded remarkably like my grandfather's whispered caution. They hadn't changed. Only their circumstances had. Walking back into that living room would mean walking back into their expectations, their manipulations. I reached for my phone again, but instead of calling my mother back, I dialed Gloria's number. "I need to know," I said when she answered. "Has anything happened recently with Chun Industries? Something that might make my parents suddenly interested in reconciliation." Gloria was silent for a moment. "I'm not supposed to be aware of your family's main business operations," she began carefully, "but in financial circles, there are always rumors. Chun Industries is facing a significant lawsuit from a competitor alleging patent infringement. There are also whispers about cash flow problems. Your father has been seeking additional investment rather urgently. And would he know yet about the foundation, about my involvement?" "Absolutely not," Gloria assured me. "Those records remain sealed until the 1-year mark your grandfather stipulated. However, double quotes," she hesitated. "Your grandfather's personal attorney, Mikhail Winters, was also involved in some Chun Industries matters. If your father has been pressing him for information about additional assets, he might have hinted that something exists without revealing details." I finished for her. "It's possible. Michael is discreet, but he's been caught between conflicting loyalties since your grandfather's passing." After thanking Gloria, I made my decision. I would attend the dinner, not because I believed my parents had changed, but because I needed to understand what they knew and what they wanted. Forewarned was forearmed. as my grandfather used to say. The knowledge I now possessed about my inheritance, about our true family history, had shifted the power dynamic between us. For the first time in my relationship with my parents, I would be entering their domain not as a disappointment seeking approval, but as an equal with secrets of my own. Saturday couldn't come quickly enough. The familiar drive to Beacon Hill felt different this time. As my modest Toyota navigated the narrow, historic street, I wasn't filled with the usual mixture of dread and longing that had accompanied previous visits home. Instead, I felt strangely calm, almost detached, as if I were observing myself from a distance. I dressed carefully for this dinner, not in the expensive designer clothes my mother would have preferred, but in a simple blue dress that projected quiet confidence. My grandfather's jade pendant hung around my neck, a tangible reminder of why I was here and whose legacy I now carried. The house looked exactly the same imposing brownstone facade, perfectly manicured window boxers despite the early spring chill, soft golden lights spilling from windows that promised warmth but had always delivered something colder. I parked across the street, taking a moment to gather my thoughts before approaching the front door. This time, instead of using my old key, I rang the doorbell like a visitor, which, I supposed, I now was. My mother answered, wearing a carefully casual cashmere ensemble that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Olivia, darling! Right on time!" She leaned in for the obligatory air kiss beside my cheek, her signature perfume Chanel No. 5 enveloping me in memories of childhood disappointments. "Mom," I acknowledged, stepping into the marble-floored entryway. "The house looks the same. Why would it change?" she asked with a perplexed smile. "We had the living room repainted last fall, but otherwise ... She trailed off as she noticed the pendant. Something flickered in her eyes, recognition, perhaps even unease. "Your grandfather's jade," she observed. "I didn't realize you had that." "It was in the box you told me to take," I replied evenly, along with some other things Grandpa wanted me to have. Before she could respond, my father emerged from his study, drink in hand. "Olivia, good of you to come." His tone suggested I should be grateful for the invitation to my childhood home. "Dad," I nodded, accepting the glass of white wine my mother handed me. "You wanted to talk?" He gestured toward the living room, that pristine showcase I'd once been afraid to disturb as a child. "Shall we?" The three of us settled into our usual positions, my parents on the matching armchairs that flanked the fireplace, me on the two-firm sofa across from them. How many conversations had we had in precisely this arrangement? How many times had I felt like I was facing a tribunal rather than speaking with family? "You're looking well," my father began, his tone suggesting mild surprise. "Your ... work must be agreeing with you." "It is," I replied simply. "We're expanding our programs next month. The demand for adult literacy services is higher than ever." My mother sipped her wine delicately. "That's admirable, I suppose, though still such a waste of your education." I let the comment pass without response. In the past, I would have launched into a passionate defense of my choices, trying desperately to make them understand the value of what I did. Tonight, I had no need for their approval. "You mentioned reconsidering your decision about the will," I prompted, steering us directly to the point of this reunion. My parents exchanged glances, a silent communication I'd witnessed countless times throughout my childhood. "Yes," my father said, setting down his glass. "Your mother and I have been reflecting on family legacy. The Chun name has always stood for excellence, perseverance, building something meaningful to pass on to future generations." The irony of him echoing my grandfather's words while missing their true meaning wasn't lost on me. "While we still believe you've made unconventional choices," he continued, "we recognize that you are still a Chun, and as such, you should have a place in the family's future." "How generous," I said, unable to keep a hint of dryness from my voice. "And what prompted this sudden change of heart?" My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Does it matter? We're offering an olive branch, Olivia, a chance to repair what's been broken." "It matters to me," I insisted gently. 2 weeks ago, you told me I was a disappointment who didn't deserve to share in the family legacy. Now you're inviting me back into the fold. Something changed." My mother jumped in, her social smoothness taking over. Your father has been under tremendous stress lately. The business, well, there have been some challenges. It made him reconsider what's truly important. The business, I repeated, Chun Industries is having problems. Temporary setbacks, my father said dismissively. Nothing we haven't weathered before. But it has made me think about your grandfather, about what he built and how he'd want the family to move forward together, not divided. There, it was the invocation of my grandfather as a tool of manipulation. In the past, it might have worked. Now, with the truth of my grandfather's legacy literally hanging around my neck, it only strengthened my resolve. I'm curious, I said, leaning forward slightly. Did Grandpa ever tell you about someone named James Sullivan? My father blinked, clearly thrown by the non sequitur. Who? James Sullivan. The man who helped Grandpa start his first business. His partner? Your grandfather didn't have a partner, my father said with absolute certainty. He built Chun Industries himself from nothing. That's the story he told 1,000 times. That's the story you heard, I corrected gently. But it wasn't the whole truth. My mother's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her wine glass. What exactly are you implying, Olivia? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. Grandpa had help from a high school English teacher who took him in when he had nothing. They became business partners. And when James died, Grandpa promised to continue his legacy of helping others. My father's expression darkened. And how exactly would you know this if it were true? My father never mentioned any such person to me. I touched the jade pendant, drawing strength from it. He told me, in letters he left behind, in recordings he made before he died. He wanted me to know the true history of our family wealth. The room fell silent. In the fireplace, a log shifted, sending up a small shower of sparks. Outside, a car passed, its headlights briefly illuminating the tension-filled space. This is absurd, my father finally said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. If my father had a former business partner, there would be records, documentation. There are, I assured him, along with other documentation you might find interesting. My mother set down her glass with a sharp click against the side table. Olivia, what exactly did your grandfather leave you besides that necklace and some fantastical stories? The moment had arrived sooner than I'd expected. I had promised to keep the foundation confidential for a year, but my grandfather had made that stipulation to protect me, to give me time to establish myself in my new role. Now, facing my parents' transparent attempt at manipulation, I decided a partial truth was necessary. Grandpa left me some of his personal papers, I said carefully. Correspondence, photographs, records from the early days of the business. Enough to know that the Chun fortune was built on a promise to help others access education, an opportunity exactly what I've dedicated my career to doing. My father's face had gone remarkably still, his lawyer's mind clearly processing implications. These ... papers. They're all you received. I met his gaze directly. They're enough to help me understand why Grandpa always supported my work when you couldn't. A sudden intuition struck me. Is that why we're really here tonight? Did Mr. Winters tell you Grandpa left something for me, and you're worried about what it might be? The flicker in my father's eyes confirmed my suspicion. Micaiah Winters, my grandfather's attorney, must have revealed enough to make my father nervous without breaking confidentiality about the foundation. Don't be ridiculous, my mother interjected, but her usual social poise had slipped. We simply wanted to mend fences. Families should stick together during difficult times. I agree completely, I said, surprised to find I actually meant it. Family should support each other, honor each other's choices and passions, see each other clearly. I stood, still holding my barely touched wine, which is why I'm going to decline your offer to be reinstated in the will. What? My father rose as well, genuine shock on his face. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I replied calmly. I don't need to be in your will to honor Grandpa's legacy. I'm already doing that every day through my work. My mother was staring at me as if seeing a stranger. In some ways, she was the Olivia who had sat in this room 2 weeks ago, hoping desperately for her parents' support and understanding, had been transformed by the truth of her grandfather's faith in her. This is about money, after all, isn't it? My father said accusingly. Whatever my father left you, you think it's enough that you don't need our inheritance. I shook my head, feeling a profound sadness for what he couldn't understand. This has never been about money, Dad. It's about purpose, about using what we have, whether that's wealth or education or just time and energy to make a difference in people's lives. I set down my wine glass and moved toward the door. Go. But I want you both to know something. Despite everything, you're still my parents. If you ever want to actually see the work I do, to understand why it matters so much to me and mattered to Grandpa, my door is always open. My father remained frozen by the fireplace, but my mother followed me to the entryway. As I reached for my coat, she surprised me by touching my arm gently. Olivia, she said, her voice lower than usual, almost uncertain. Your grandfather, was he disappointed in us? In how we raised you? The vulnerability in her question caught me off guard. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the insecurity beneath my mother's perfect exterior, the immigrant's daughter who had married into wealth and spent decades trying to prove she belonged there. No, I said truthfully. He was proud of what you and Dad achieved. He just hoped you'd remember why it all mattered in the first place. She nodded slightly, her hand falling away from my arm. The jade suits you, she said finally. He would be pleased to see you wearing it. It wasn't an apology or a reconciliation, but it was something, a tiny crack in the wall between us, letting in the faintest sliver of light. As I drove away from Beacon Hill, the weight I'd carried for years, the need for my parents' approval, the desire to make them understand my choice, seemed to lift from my shoulders. I was no longer defined by their expectations or disappointments. I was my grandfather's heir in the ways that truly mattered, carrying forward not just his name or his wealth, but his values and his vision. The confrontation I dreaded had instead become a liberation. Whatever came next, whether my parents eventually came to accept my path or remained entrenched in their judgment, I could face it with the certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Autumn in Boston painted the city in brilliant reds and golds, transforming the urban landscape into something magical. From the window of my new office on the second floor of what we now called the Sullivan Center, I could see the courtyard where students gathered during breaks, many of them immigrants like my grandfather had once been, all of them seeking the education that would open doors to new possibilities. 9 months had passed since I'd discovered my inheritance. In that time, Second Chance Education Initiative had undergone a metamorphosis, evolving from a struggling nonprofit into the flagship program of the Liu Educational Trust. We'd moved from our cramped Victorian into the renovated brown, expanded our staff from 5 to 15, and more than tripled the number of students we served. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Some staff had struggled with the sudden influx of resources after years of scarcity. Our grant writer, Paul, had actually resigned, uncomfortable with what he called becoming part of the establishment. But most, like Maya, had embraced the opportunity to finally implement programs they'd been dreaming about for years. Knock knock, Maya said, appearing in my doorway with 2 coffee cups. Got a minute for you and caffeine. Always. Always. I gestured to the comfortable seating area we'd created for student consultations, so different from the folding chairs in our old location. Maya handed me a cup and settled into an armchair. The new citizenship preparation class is full already. We've got a waiting list of 23 people. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. The comprehensive citizenship program had been Maya's passion project for years. It is, she agreed, then hesitated. But it also means we need another instructor, and probably more space soon. We're growing faster than we anticipated. I nodded, understanding her concern. The foundation can support the expansion, and the building next door comes available next year when the lease expires. We've been planning for this. Maya studied me over the rim of her cup. You've changed, you know. In good ways, she added quickly. You're more confident, more settled somehow. But sometimes I miss the old Olivia who used to panic with me over budget shortfalls and celebrate when we found free furniture on the curb. Her observation made me smile, though it carried a hint of melancholy. I miss her sometimes too. Things were simpler then. In some ways, just promise me something, Maya said. Don't forget what it was like to struggle. That perspective is valuable, especially now that you're making decisions about resources that affect so many people. I promise, I said, reaching across to squeeze her hand. And that's why I need you to keep being honest with me, to call me out if I start losing touch with our core mission. Our conversation was interrupted by a knock on the open door. Daniel, our newest instructor, looked apologetic for the intrusion. Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here asking for you. Olivia says he's your father. I nearly spilled my coffee. My father? Here. Since our confrontation 6 months ago, communication with my parents had been limited to terse text messages on birthdays and holidays. I certainly hadn't expected either of them to show up at my workplace. I'll go, Maya said, standing immediately. She'd heard enough about my family dynamics to understand the significance of this visit. After they left, I took a moment to compose myself, straightening papers on my desk that didn't need straightening. What could have prompted this unexpected appearance? Had the one-year confidentiality period somehow been breached early? When I finally emerged from my office, I found my father standing awkwardly in the reception area, looking distinctly out of place in his bespoke suit. He was studying the wall of student success stories, photographs, and testimonials from people whose lives had been changed through our programs. Dad, I said, drawing his attention, this is a surprise. He turned, and I was struck by how much older he looked than when I'd last seen him. There were new lines around his eyes, a slight stoop to shoulders that had always been military's. Olivia, he acknowledged, with a small nod. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just the daily work of changing lives, I said, then softened my tone. But I have time. Would you like to come up to my office? He glanced around the bright, welcoming space with its multilingual welcome signs and community bulletin boards. Actually, I was hoping you might show me around first, if that's possible. The request was so unexpected that for a moment I thought I'd misheard. My father had never shown the slightest interest in my work before. Of course, I said, recovering quickly. We're in the middle of afternoon classes, so you can see everything in action. I led him through the building, explaining our different programs as we went. The adult literacy classes where recent immigrants practiced reading English newspapers, the computer lab where seniors learned digital skills, the after-school program where neighborhood children received homework help from volunteered tutors. My father said little, but I could see him taking everything in the quality of the renovated facilities, the engagement of the students, the obvious dedication of the staff. When we paused by a classroom where a citizenship preparation class was underway, he watched through the window as the instructor walked students through the process of completing naturalization forms. This is what your grandfather wanted to see his money used for, he said suddenly, his voice so quiet I barely caught the words. I turned to him in surprise. You know about the foundation? He nodded slowly. Michael Winters finally told me everything last month. Said he couldn't legally reveal the details earlier because of the confidentiality clause, but that the year was almost up anyway. He met my eyes directly. $28 million. A separate foundation I knew nothing about. Properties, investments, all of it kept hidden from me, his only son. There was hurt beneath the accusation. A wounded pride I hadn't expected to see so nakedly displayed. He wasn't trying to hurt you, Dad, I said gently. He was trying to protect something he believed in deeply. By going behind my back, by deciding I couldn't be trusted with his true legacy. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Deed, Mr. Winters explained about James Sullivan, about how Grandpa got his start. My father's jaw tightened. He showed me the documentation. The original partnership agreement. The letters. He shook his head slightly. All these years, I thought I knew the story of our family's success. Turns out I only knew the version my father wanted me to hear. We continued walking, ending up in the small garden behind the building where several students were taking a break, conversing in a mixture of English and their native languages. My father stood silently, watching them. Why did you come here today? I finally asked. It wasn't just to tell me, about the foundation. He took a deep breath, seeming to steel himself for what came next. Chun Industries is failing. Olivia, the lawsuit, cash flow problems, poor investment decisions, some mine, some that predated me. We're going to have to sell probably at a significant loss. Though Gloria had hinted at troubles, the bluntness of his admission shocked me. My father had always projected absolute confidence in the business, treating it as an unshakable legacy that would endure for generations. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Whatever our differences, I knew how much the company meant to him. "Is there anything I can do?" A humorless smile crossed his face. "That's why I'm here, though not in the way you might think. I'm not asking for money from the foundation. I know that's not possible, legally or ethically." "Then what?" "Advice," he said simply. "You've built something here that works. That matters." I thought I was doing the same with Chun Industries, but somewhere along the way, I lost sight of why we were in business in the first place. The vulnerability in his admission left me momentarily speechless. In all my life, I couldn't remember my father ever asking for my input on anything, let alone something as significant as the family business. "I'm not a business consultant," I said carefully. "My expertise is in education, not corporate restructuring." "I don't need another consultant," he replied. "I need someone who understands what my father truly valued, someone who can help me see if there's a way to salvage not just the company, but its purpose." We found a bench in a quiet corner of the garden. For the next hour, my father talked more openly than he ever had about the challenges facing Chun Industries, the pressure he felt to maintain the family legacy, and his growing realization that he had defined that legacy too narrowly. "Your grandfather used to talk about meaningful success," he said at one point. "I always thought he meant financial achievements, expansion, market dominance. Now I wonder if he meant something entirely different." "He did," I confirmed. In his letter to me, he said true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in lives changed. My father nodded slowly. "I've been measuring the wrong things for a long time." As the afternoon progressed, our conversation shifted from the company's immediate problems to broader questions about its future direction. Could Chun Industries pivot toward educational technology? Were there ways to integrate my father's business expertise with the mission-driven approach of the foundation? Nothing was decided, but possibilities began to emerge from our dialogue. Possibilities neither of us could have envisioned months earlier. As shadows lengthened across the garden, my father checked his watch reluctantly. "I should go. I've taken enough of your time." "It's been well spent," I assured him. This conversation was unexpected, but important. He stood, adjusting his suit jacket in that characteristic gesture I'd seen thousands of times. "Your mother would like to see this place too. She won't admit it, but she's curious about what you've built here." "She's welcome any time," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "Both of you are—" At the front entrance, my father paused, looking back at the building with its new sign. "Sullivan Center for Educational Opportunity, a program of the Liu Educational Trust. He would be proud of you," my father said quietly. My father. "And this James Sullivan too, I suppose." "I hope so," I replied. "But you know what matters more to me now? That I'm proud of what we're doing here. That's something I learned from Grandpa that took a long time to sink in. External validation is nice, but internal conviction is what sustains you." My father considered this, then nodded slightly. "Another lesson I'm learning rather late." He extended his hand formally. "Thank you for the tour, Olivia, and for the conversation." I looked at his outstretched hand, then stepped forward and hugged him instead. He stiffened momentarily, then awkwardly patted my back. It wasn't the warm embrace I might have wished for, but it was a start, a small crack in the wall of formality that had always existed between us. As I watched him walk to his car, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, hope, caution, a tentative optimism. One visit wouldn't heal decades of misunderstanding and disappointment. One conversation wouldn't transform my father from a profit-focused businessman into a philanthropist, but it was movement in a direction I'd never thought possible. Later that evening, as I prepared for our monthly board meeting of the Lued Educational Trust, I found myself returning to the jade pendant my grandfather had left me. I'd worn it every day since finding it in that box, drawing strength and purpose from its connection to him. Now, running my fingers over its smooth surface, I realized it represented something more, not just a link to the past, but a bridge to a possible future where the values he'd tried to instill might finally take root across generations. The board meeting went smoothly, with unanimous approval for our expanded citizenship preparation program and the proposed acquisition of the neighboring building. As we concluded, Gloria Pattison, who had become both mentor and friend over these months, pulled me aside. "Tomorrow marks 1 year," she reminded me. "The confidentiality period ends, and the Foundation's full details become public record. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about my father's visit, about the conversations that might follow when the full scope of my grandfather's decision became known to everyone in our social and business circles. "As prepared as I can be," I replied. "It's time for the Liu Educational Trust to step fully into the light. Your grandfather would be pleased with how you've handled everything," Gloria said warmly. "Taking on this responsibility, expanding the programs thoughtfully, and now perhaps most challenging of all, beginning to bridge the divide with your parents. That part's still very much a work in progress." Today was just one conversation, but it's a conversation that couldn't have happened a year ago, she pointed out. "Sometimes the most important journeys begin with the smallest steps." That night, I sat in the small living room of my apartment, the same modest space I'd occupied before discovering my inheritance. Despite having access to significant resources now, I'd chosen to stay here to maintain a connection to the life I'd built before. On my coffee table sat the photograph of my grandfather and James Sullivan standing proudly before their first literacy center. Beside it, I placed a new edition, a simple frame containing my grandfather's words from his letter. "True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in lives changed." Tomorrow, the world would know about the Liu Educational Trust and my role as its trustee. Tomorrow might bring new challenges, new scrutiny, perhaps even new conflicts with my parents despite today's tentative thaw. But tonight, looking at these two items that represented my true inheritance, I felt a profound sense of peace. My grandfather's letter had indeed changed everything, not by making me wealthy in the conventional sense, but by connecting me to a legacy of purpose and compassion that no will could ever convey. He had entrusted me not just with resources, but with values, with a story of kindness repaid across generations, with a vision of success measured in human terms. As I turned out the lights and prepared for bed, I remembered something my grandfather had told me years ago. When I was struggling with my parents' disappointment over my career choice, "The most valuable things we inherit aren't things at all, Olivia. They're the truths we live by, the examples we follow, the courage to be who we're meant to be." It had taken his final letter to help me fully understand what he meant. Now, with that understanding, I faced the future not as someone cut off from family legacy, but as its truest inheritor, the one who had recognized its most valuable elements and committed to carrying them forward. That, more than any amount in a will, was the redemption my grandfather had planned all along.